Hey guys, so this video is for those who's starting to learn React, and for those who has gone through this tic-tac-toe tutorial that's on the React website. So if you haven't checked this out, please check it out. I highly recommend it. You will learn the basics of React with this tutorial. Links in the description below. But what this video is about is for those who has gone through this tutorial, you will know that they use like the more of the old school way of doing things in React, which is class-based components. Now, class-based components are probably not going away. However, the trend is nowadays that we use functional components with hooks to manage our states. However, this tutorial, because they haven't updated it with the modern hook stuff, they still use traditional class-based components like so. And so what I aim to do with this video is to use functional to convert these code into a functional based component way of doing things using hooks such as use state and such. And also, as an added twist, I want to make this a TypeScript project. So TypeScript is gaining tremendously in popularity right now. And even at my current work, we use TypeScript with our React projects. So I highly recommend for those who are starting out to slowly start learning about TypeScript. Now, it's not that scary, it's not that hard, and I think most people will catch on to it fairly quickly. So if you have never tried TypeScript before, don't be scared. I will try my best to show you guys the steps as to why we're writing the things that we do. So it should be fairly simple to follow along. And I think especially for those who has done this tutorial, it'll be a good way to compare your old code of the old way of doing things with the more modern way of approaching this project. All right, so the way that we are going to start is, let me get my code editor here. All right, so I've reorganized my window a little bit and I have my terminal open here on an empty file. So I'm on an empty folder right now. So I want you guys to go to make an empty folder. I just called mine tic-tac-toe. And I am gonna use create React app, but a TypeScript create React app. And the way that we do that is write npx create React app. And because I'm already in the folder that I'm on, usually you will write the folder name next, but I'm just gonna put period because I'm just telling React to put it in this folder. Let me zoom in just a little bit for you guys. And then I'm gonna write --template TypeScript. And then press enter, and this will create you a TypeScript version of a create React app. All right, so that took me about like an hour. No, I'm just kidding. It took me a few minutes to get that all set up. So hopefully it has it finished installing for you guys as well. So what I want you guys to do is go in the source directory, erase all of this here. We don't need any of this. And then we're gonna kind of follow the directions. I want you to go to their website unless you already have the finished code with you. But if you don't, let's go to the very end. And it says here, check out the final results here. So let's click this link and bring the code over to our editor. So we have a couple files. We need the CSS file. So let me just expand that real quick. So get all of this. I just selected everything, copy it. And within our source directory, we're gonna make an index.css. So let's write index.css. Don't ask me again. That's just asking me if I want to track it on Git. And I just pasted everything to this index.css file. So you guys should do the same. Now let's close this CSS and let's open the JavaScript. Because now we're going to bring the JavaScript file. Except normally if you were to follow this tutorial, they will have you make an index.js. But because we're dealing with a TypeScript file, we're going to make a new file called index.tsx. Index.tsx, and this is how you create a TypeScript file. So let's get all of this code, which we will edit slowly to make it more quote-unquote modern with React hooks and also TypeScript. And I'm just gonna paste it all in here. Now we gotta import a few things before we go on though. So in the very top, let's import React from React. Import React DOM from React-DOM. And finally, what else do we need? I feel like we need one more thing. Oh yeah, we gotta import the index.css. So import current directory index.css. Now, assuming so we're getting a couple errors right now because we have a TypeScript file. So I'm just gonna assume that everything is correct. I mean, we just pretty much copied and pasted, right? And what I want us to do is, let me open up another window here, a little diagram that I've made. Let me zoom in here real quick. So this is pretty much how the tic-tac-toe game is architected. So we have this game component that manages all of our states. We have three states here. We have the history, which keeps track of all the tiles at different steps. We have the current step number, and we also have this boolean called x is next. This pretty much determines whether it's x going or o going. And this game component passes down to the next component, which is a board component. And we pass down a part of the history, which we call squares. So that is the current history's iteration of how the board looks like. And we also pass an on-click event handler so that whenever we click on a square, it will update the history up here on the game. And now within the board component, it renders several, not board, but I think they call it square. I forgot to update that. It has several square components, and I think it has 9 exactly because there's 9 squares in a board. And it passes up value, which will either be a null value or O value or an X value, and also the on-click. So the on-click that it got from the game, it just passes that right along to the square. We also have this calculate winner function that calculates the winner if there is a winner. So let's go one by one and convert these into a React functional component and also a TypeScript file. So the way that we're going to do that is we have to first type the props and also type any methods that's in here, such as this render square method here. And I think that's it. We also got to make it into a functional component for those that's not a functional component like this one. So how about we start with the easiest one, and we'll start converting the square. So let's look on the square. It's on the very top. It should be on the very top of your index.tsx. Let me just make this a little bigger. So check this out. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use ES6 arrow notation to represent this function. So let's get rid of this function word, and we'll write const square, which is equal to, const square is equal to, and it has a props. I'm just going to erase those parentheses and put an arrow notation like so. Now, TypeScript is giving us an error right now on the props. And what it's pretty much saying is that it has an implicitly any type. We didn't type the props that this square will receive. And that's what we're going to do now. But even before we do that, what we have to do is we have to type this component itself. We have to let TypeScript know that this is a functional component. So the way that we do that is to type things, we put colon, and then we give the type here. But the type that we're dealing with for this is React.fc. FC stands for functional component. So this is letting React know that this is not any function, not any ordinary function, but a functional component of React. So, and to type our props now, the way that we do that is we put brackets like so, right after a React.fc, and we put the type of our props here. Now, let's define the props of square. So the way that I traditionally do things is I just define an interface. An interface will tell, once we define a proper interface for a component, it will tell the component pretty much all the props that it is getting and the type that each prop is. So I'm going to call this interface square props. That's the standard that I follow for me personally. I just write the component name and then just add the word props at the end. And notice that I capitalized the square props. So going back to this diagram, we know that it gets a value and an on-click. So let's type our value first. Now, what is the value? So again, I'm assuming that you guys have gone through this tutorial. If you did, you will know that the value is going to be either X, O, or a null value. X and O's, they kind of look like this, X or O or a null value. So these are both strings here, right? So what we can do is we could make value into a string, which is either X or O or null. So this is one way of doing things, but even better than this, we know that the value is not just any string. For example, it can't be hello, the string hello. It has to be either a capital X or a capital O. So a better way to type this is just tell TypeScript no, it's either a literal X string or a literal O string or no. So this is how I'm going to type our value. Now, and before we go on, I know that we have one more prop for this, but let's just type our square component by going inside our triangle brackets here and writing square props. And the moment we do that, I don't know if you saw that, but the red squiggly error line down here, it went away because now it knows that this prop value exists because we told it that it has a value property. Now this onClick is still erroring out because we didn't tell it what it is yet. So before we go on, we know that the board is passing the square onClick. Let me just look at what it looks like. So it's a function, but I want to see exactly what type of function it is. And we have that here, right here, onClick. So we're passing a function that takes in no parameters. You see here that takes in no parameters, and it calls its props onClick function. Now let's look at its props onClick function. Remember, the board also receives an onClick from the game. So let's check out what that looks like from our game component. And let's see. At the very bottom, we have this board, and it's getting an onClick that passes an I and calls the handleClick method. Now, looking at the handleClick method, it does a lot of complicated stuff, but what we're interested in is what does this function return? It returns nothing here, undefined, and it actually doesn't return anything. It just sets a couple state, but the function itself doesn't return anything. So it is called a void function. When a function doesn't return anything, we call it a void function. It returns void. So the way that I'm going to type this, onClick, and let's just alphabetize these. I'm going to put it above the value. onClick is a function that has no parameter, at least in this instance, but is a void function. The output is void. It doesn't return anything. So now our square is properly set up. So let's move on now to the board component. So the board component now is a little bit more interesting than our square component because it has its own method. So let's try converting this into a functional component. So I'm going to do the same thing, erase all this nonsense here, const board, which is also a functional component, react.fc, I'll type it later, is equal to props, and like so. Now we're getting a bunch of errors, it's fine. Let's type our board first. So we're going to write interface board props, and let's just type it right now, and we'll fill in the properties as we go. Right, board props here. Now let's look briefly at what the board receives. It receives a squares and an onClick. Let's do the onClick first because we already know part of it. So I'm going to write onClick here. And again, it's a function, but we got to be very careful because it's actually slightly different. So if you go back to the game component and look at the board, it passes an onClick. Look here, we have a parameter here. The input, we have a parameter, is an I, and for those who already made this tic-tac-toe game, you know that this is a number, and it calls a void function, like we talked about before. So the typing of this onClick is a little different. We have I here, which is a number. This is how you type the parameter, and it returns void, just like before. So notice here, within the square props, we don't have the I parameter because he already knows which square he is. But the board, we have multiple squares, so we have to pass an I parameter, the index, the number. And now let's type something that's a little bit more tricky, which is a square. So squares. All right, so again, I assume that you have already gone through this tutorial. If you did, you will know that a square is a size 9 element array that has either X, O, or null value, nine of these, right? So it pretty much gives you all the values on each of the squares. So how do we type this? So we know, just like this value, each element has the same value, same type as this value here, right? So what we can do is put a parentheses, put that type here, but tell it that it's an array, like so. But now, we're gonna repeat our code a lot. So we have this long type here, X, O, or null. We also have it down here, and I'm pretty sure we're gonna be seeing it a little bit more often. So whenever you have this, a type that you're constantly reusing, we could actually define the type kind of like a variable. So let's do that in the very top. Let's write type, and what should we call this type? Maybe we could call it square value. How about that? And within square value, type square value is just gonna equal this. So from now on, what we can do is we could just reference that. So value is square value type, and also the square array here is just, I could get rid of parentheses and just write square value array like that. Now, unfortunately, there's no way to tell TypeScript that it's a length 9 array, but this will be good enough for now. And let's slowly start converting this. So the first thing we can do is a class-based component has a render method. However, in a functional component, you don't need this render method. So let's just get rid of this and make sure you erase the closing brace along with it, like so. Let me just get rid of some space, and just to make it a little bit more pretty, let's detab this. What's the word? Untab? Just left tab this. And another thing about functional components is it doesn't use the this keyword. We don't need to reference this. Right here, what they're saying in the class-based component, they want to call this method here within the board. However, in the functional component, to call this function here, to call this method, we don't use the word this, we just call the function itself. So let me select all these this, and let's just erase that. And now let's make this appropriate in a functional component. So in a class-based component, we don't put any like const or anything. We just call the method name and we make that into a function like so. However, that's not how we do things in a functional component. We gotta declare it as a const. So const render square, and this is a function, right? So this I is a number, and the output of this, it returns a component, a square component. Now, how do we type this? How do we type this component? How do we tell TypeScript that it's returning a React component? So the most general way of doing things, and this has served me really well, is we're gonna import something up here and use that. So the most general term for all React components is this thing called React node. And this is the type that we're gonna use. So when we're returning a square here, we're returning a React node, like so. Notice it's no longer complaining to us about this. Now it's complaining here because we don't use the this keyword to reference our props, so let's erase that. And now, oh, by the way, I forgot to put an arrow, final arrow here. And now there's no more complaints. All right, so our square is done and our board is done. We have given it an interface of the type of the props, and we have updated it into a functional component. Now this is where it gets a little bit more tricky, and we're gonna convert this game component here. Now the reason why this is a little bit more tricky is because it's a little bit more complicated. First of all, it has several methods, but not only that, it has its own state. It manages its own state. So how do we use state in a functional component? You guys probably already know this, but it's by using hooks, by using the useState hook, and that's what we're gonna do here. All right, so let's start with the easy stuff. Let me convert this class into a functional component. So let's write const game, which is a React.functional component. We will just write game props, and let's just define that here, and we'll fill it in as we go. Interface game props, and does it get props? Let's see. It doesn't get any props or anything because it's the parent component. So we actually don't need to have game props. Sorry about that, because it doesn't have props. So whenever a component doesn't have props, we just don't need to have that bracket there. Put an empty, because we don't need to reference any props, although they are referencing here for the constructor because they need to for a class-based component. However, we're not dealing with class-based components. We're dealing with a functional component, so we won't need any props here. Okay, so in a functional component, we don't have such a thing called a constructor. So how do we convert this to a functional component? Let's first look at what this is doing here. It has all the boilerplate, like the super props, that you just need that. And here we're defining a state. We're defining 3 state variables. So it is the history, the step number, and the XX next. So we are going to use the useState hook to declare these variables. So the way that you typically define a useState is, let's first import the useState function first, at the very top from React. So comma useState. All right. So the way that we deal, let's deal with the easy ones first, the XX next, right? So you write const and you put a square bracket, and the first one, we're gonna have 2 elements inside this array. The first one is the variable itself, which is x is next. And the next one is gonna be a function that the useState hook gives you, wherein you call the function to update the value of this state. And the standard way to name this is to use the word set in front of your variable name. So in our case, it will be set x is next, like so. And then we're gonna write useState. Because we are dealing with a TypeScript file, we're gonna type what type this is, what type this state is, and we know that it is a Boolean type. So let's write Boolean. And now within this parentheses, we provide the initial value. So if you look at this constructor here, the initial value of x is next is true. So let's write true here. All right, so we took care of one state. Let's take care of the other ones. The next one is step number. Next easy one, I mean. Step number, set step number. I'm gonna call the useState hook. And this one is now gonna be a number, and we're gonna initialize it as 0. Now the last one is a little bit tricky, but it's only tricky because the shape of it is kind of complicated. If you do know the shape, then it shouldn't be too hard. So let's write history, set history. This is going to be a useState. Now let's be very careful about how we type this. By the way, the initial value, we could just bring it over here. Copy this whole thing, and that's our initial value, like so. All right, now the question remains, how do we type this? Let's see, why is it giving me an error? I'm not sure yet. Because we had to give it a type. So the outer shell of this is an array. So we know we're going to be dealing with something that's array. Now the inside of the array has an object by these green curly brace, which has a key of squares, and the value of that is just the array of our square value type, square value here. So where was I? Kind of lost my step. Okay, here we are. All right, so we're dealing with an array that has an object, right? That has the square key, which has a value of square value array, like so. Now notice that I no longer have an error. So this is how you would type this. A little bit confusing, a little bit hard to read, but once you get a little practice of it, it shouldn't be too hard typing these type of things. So now let's get rid of this constructor because we successfully converted that to a functional component. Now, which one should we deal with? Let's deal with this handle click. So I'm gonna write const handle click, which is equal to I as a parameter, which is a number. And the output of this is void. This is a void function, as we have discussed before. Let's put an arrow there. And now it says const history is this dot history dot slice. However, we already have history here. The way that you reference these state variables, you never use this in a functional component. We just write history. We don't have to reference a history either. We do history dot slice, and then we get the step number by just like calling it the step number. But now we're getting a little error here, and it has to do with the block scope variable. Pretty much we're defining a variable here where it's already, the variable name is already within the scope. This function already knows the variable history. So we're declaring a new one. So this is where the conflict arises. So maybe the better way to take care of this is update, not this one, but rename this one to maybe new history. Now, I use my code completion, so maybe this is unfair if you don't know how to do this. So let me just undo. Let's do this together. And I call this new history. Copy this new history word Now, whenever you see history from down here within this method, we're going to update it with a new history. So history, new history, new history. Where else? Not this history, not the key, but this one, although we're going to erase it anyways, whatever. All right, so that should be it right now. Okay, so now we have current, which gets the current iteration within the history. And the square, we're making a copy of the squares here. And if calculate winner or square I, then return. That means if there was a winner, then return. Otherwise, squares I is this that state that x is next. We don't need all this nonsense here for a functional component. If x is next, then you make this x or O. Now we're setting the state here. So how we set state in a functional component is by calling these set methods here. But here's the thing. We're setting 3 different state variables here. So how do we deal with this in a functional component? You just call them one by one. So let's write set history is going to be this big thing right here. New history concat this. And again, forgive me if I'm not explaining why they're doing it a certain way, like what this means. I'm just going to assume that you have gone through the tutorial, so you should know what this is about. And we should also have set step number, which is new history dot length. And also x is next, set x is next. That's going to be not x is next, like so. All right, so I think we have successfully converted our handle click. Now let's convert our jump to. So it's going to be const jump to. This step, for those you should know, is a number type. And this also just only sets state. It doesn't return anything, so it's a void function as well. As a matter of fact, if you're dealing with TypeScript, React project, a lot of your methods will be a void function within the functional component, because usually they're just setting the state. Not always though. This that says state, we're just saying states here. So let's do the same thing. Set step number, just gonna be step, and set x is next. I don't want to type all this in, so let's just copy that and bring it over here. And now we got this render. Remember, render doesn't exist in a functional component, so let's erase that and its closing brace. Now, just to pretty things up a little bit, let's get all of this and left tab it like so. Let's get rid of that line. WebStorm wants the semicolon there. All right, so now we're getting another error here because it's a redeclare of block scope variable. Remember, we already have history here, so we can't call this history anymore. So just like we did for the render handle click method where we call it new history instead, let's call it something else here. So what should we call it? But notice what this history is doing. It's just referencing this state history. So we actually don't need this, because to reference our state history, we just call history, right? And after he declared this, he just uses it to get this current. So why don't we just erase this part right here? Now we should be fine. However, we gotta erase this state step number and just reference it by step number. And let's see what else we can do. We have a couple errors here. I guess we could type this within the map. I know that this step is a square value. However, TypeScript already knows what this is. So map, first of all, the second parameter is always the index. So he already knows, if you hover over here, he already knows that it's a number. So I guess we could type this to be explicit, but there's really no need. And not only that, he knows what this step is. It's a square array of a square value. And he knows that because he knows what the type of history is. So again, it's personal preference whether you choose to type this or not. I'm just not going to, because we're just going to add more words. So let's just leave it as it is. Let's change this. Remember, we never used this in a functional component, so we could do that. And let's get rid of this state here. So hopefully you guys are seeing that by using functional components, we're eliminating a lot of duplicate, a lot of unnecessary code, a lot of extra lines of code. We also don't need this here. So I think our game board is pretty good. Now, there is a way to refactor some of this, but let's not do that now. Let's go to our now final function that calculates the winner. So I'm going to first convert this to an arrow notation, const calculate winner. and this is just pure personal preference. And this will return, hopefully you guys know this will either return null, X, or O, meaning it's returning a square type, like so. And put an arrow after that. And now what is the type of this square? So it is just square type array. It's not called square type. Oh, it's called square value. I'm sorry. So let's update these to square value. Now there we go. So we do all this tests, otherwise we return either O or X or null. So I think we're done. So we don't have any more errors here, so that's good. We've typed all of our props, the ones that need typing. So I think we're done. Now let's see if it works. So I'm gonna open up my terminal and write npm start. All right, so I just finished loading. Now we're getting this error called reference error, cannot access calculate winner before initialization. So actually, this is my bad. The reason why this is happening is because within our game component, we are referencing our calculate winner here, right? But what did we do? The calculate winner function is down here, but I've converted it to an arrow notation, to an arrow function. So one thing difference between the traditional function notation and the arrow notation is traditional functions are hoisted up, meaning during compile time, JavaScript brings this function up so that you could reference it before using it. However, because we use the arrow notation for whatever reason, just out of pure preference, we can't declare this anymore before we use it because arrow notations are not hoisted up. So one way we could solve this is either convert this back to a traditional function notation or just bring it up. So that's what I'm gonna do, is I'm going to bring it up here. Where should I put it? Maybe up here. Maybe that's not a good idea. Let's put it after our type square value type, like so. Now I'm gonna save, and we have our game here. Hopefully you guys have it too if you guys did everything, but let's see if it works. So we keep on going, and we pretty much have the same game. If you see here, we have the same game. However, we've converted this project to a TypeScript project. So I just wanted to give you guys, for those who are starting out in React, who also wants to be more comfortable with the functional components with hooks, this is a good comparison, a good tutorial, I think, to convert an existing code base that uses class-based components to convert it to functional components and also to type it by using TypeScript. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Let me know any comments below. If you liked the video, please click like and subscribe to my content. You will find React tutorial videos and anything related to coding, you'll find it here. Guys, and I'll see you guys next time. Happy coding.